It's time to have some fun.
The Exorcist is one of the most famous horror movies of all time. Reasons include its questioning of faith in a time period where religion, specifically in America, but also just in general, was higher, as well as a realistic depiction of a possession. Well, realistic, even though we've never seen, whatever. Enacted by a malevolent spirit, aka a demon.
Got any demons out tonight? Any horny boys?
The 1973 film, directed by William Friedkin, gave nightmares to mass amounts of audiences, even getting banned in some areas, and it would inspire countless other movies that would come out in the genre. Some famous examples include The Blair Witch Project, as well as the Conjuring series. The Exorcist was a box office and critical success, and it is a pioneer in the horror genre, and regarded as one of the best movies ever made. Then a sequel came out, and everybody stopped caring.
Father, please bring her back.
However, behind The Exorcist 2, The Heretic, lies a diamond of a third movie. And today, ladies and gentlemen, and everyone watching, we will be watching The Exorcist 3. I'll be giving a review, as well as talking about why The Exorcist 3 should have been the real sequel to The Exorcist. However, first, if you're new here, welcome, and if you're returning, it's good to see you again. If you enjoyed the video at any point, then leaving a like really helps out, and if you're new here, hopefully I can earn your subscription by the end of the video. Alright, let's get into it. The first Exorcist film follows 12-year-old Reagan, and if you can remember your middle school years, they sucked. Hormones and all the side effects that came with it really made it rough. You know, side effects like acne, which you might have been mistaken in thinking that acne will go away once you hit your 20s. It doesn't. Even if you wash your face twice daily, it's still there. Or how about other side effects like getting possessed by a demon? Or what about your balls dropping? Oh, what's that? You don't have balls? But luckily for Reagan, her childhood was full of exciting events. Like a demon named Pazuzu possessing her.
Shove it up your ass!
Bitch! Yeah, so Pazuzu completely distorts Reagan. And Reagan's mother, just being a tad bit concerned about her daughter getting possessed by a demon, she calls up two Catholic priests to do the title.
Say that again?
Good news. We can finally be bees. This isn't your world, but we can be bees.
To perform an exorcist. And the themes of questioning religion and faith is extremely prevalent in the film. Not only because there's a demon, and I don't know if you know this, but a demon's whole goal is to persuade you away from God. But also specifically with Father Karras, he has a plotline in the story where his mother is dying, and him being a younger priest is already questioning his faith because, you know, his mom's dying. And now a demon with some personal ass insults just shows up and throws a wrench into everything. Other themes like the battle of the complex relationship of good versus evil, and the struggle of doubt within it, is also what makes this movie so iconic. And speaking of iconic, that comes along with amazing scenes that are stuck in so many people's heads.
Jesus, fuck you! Please, fuck you! You know what she did?
Jesus Christ, who lives and reigns with the Father and the Holy Spirit. Damien!
And on top of all of that, a gripping story, it's no wonder why the 1973 Exorcist became such a spectacle. Now, to top the first Exorcist movie is an extremely high bar that most directors probably would have struggled with. I don't think I can explain how much of an impact the 1973 Exorcist had. If you're a horror fan, you probably know this, but if you're not, the horror genre and the movie discography has not always been respected to the level it should be. An example of what I'm trying to say is there are countless actors in the horror genre who I personally think could have won multiple Oscars, or Grammys, or whatever the fuck those pretentious ass awards are. The awards for movies. If the judges and the people in the suits who decide what movies get awards or not actually gave a damn about art. Because here's a shocker, horror movies are an art form. And the idea that horror isn't as recognized as other genres in the film space was much more notable back in the 70s. Yet The Exorcist still broke down walls by becoming a pop culture phenomenon. Now, I personally think it's because of all the controversy that surrounded it. That's not to say it's not because it's an amazing movie, but I want to hammer the point in that Christianity was a big thing back then.
You've come. I have come.
Like, people today will call things demonic that they don't like all the time. But back in the 70s, when people called things demonic, they had the ability to censor them or get them removed. Which is what happened to The Exorcist. And I think all that helped The Exorcist propel forward. Because look, there's a lot of rebellious people out there, like myself, because I'm a bad boy.
And she love chocolate dessert.
There's a lot of rebellious people out there who will just go do something because someone said not to. This is all to say that The Exorcist was pretty much a grand slam when it comes to movies back then. and it still holds up today. So topping that is an extremely high bar that the second one did not live up to. And I want to quickly mention that what I'm about to say about The Exorcist 2 is not to say that the movie is a bad movie, because it can be enjoyable. However, compared to the first movie, it is minuscule. And what makes it even worse is the third movie was actually pretty good. So it's Oreoed in between two really, really good movies. With that all being said, it's exaggeration time, baby. The Exorcist 2 sucks! The Exorcist 2, The Heretic, is a 1977 supernatural horror, directed by John Boorman and Roscoe Pallenberg. It follows Reagan, the guy in the first movie who was possessed by Pazuzu. Pazuzu? More like, piss and, whatever. She's in an institution to help receive aid for her troubled self. And there's a doctor in here named Dr. Tuscan who has a nice little cool hypnotic device that reveals that Pazuzu is still within Reagan. So that whole Exorcist in the first movie didn't work. So what's the point of the first movie, you may ask? Don't ask that. In the second Exorcist, there's also a side plot with Father Philip investigating the death of the priest who died during the exorcism in the first movie. And he also finds out that Pazuzu is still perusing. And that's pretty much the plot. Now, a huge reason why the movie was panned so badly, other than some shoddy acting,
deeper, deeper, Reagan, deeper,
and a story that was a little too hard to follow at certain points. And not because it's too clever, because, like, I'm a smart guy. I have glasses. Watch this. And now I'm even smarter. I took a couple classes in community college. I have a big brain. And yet this movie's plot is still dumb. That's to say, I'm aware when a movie's too clever for me. Even though I think that this movie is just ass. But hey, some people like it because they're just so smart. Back to The Exorcist 2. The biggest reason The Exorcist 2 was dogpiled so much was because of its giant 180 turn in themes. And like, just the overall vibe. Now, I know that's not the greatest description, but hear me out. The first Exorcist was much more of a smaller scale mystery horror that perfected supernatural elements. Meanwhile, the sequel introduced things like science fiction and weird dreamlike sequences. Like the whole hypnotizing in the second movie, which is like one of the biggest returning factors in the movie, that clashes with the demon possession. And also the themes that were established in the first movie. Like, there'll be like things where it's like, oh, the demon gets hurt by holy water. And then in the second movie, it's like, oh yeah, well watch this. Woo, 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 woo. And then the demon's just like, don't do that. It doesn't make sense. I want to make a point that I don't think that's inherently bad. In fact, that's actually a good thing for a sequel to branch out. I just think that The Exorcist 2 made too big of a leap from the original. Something that can explain the extreme tone switch and just weird movie that The Exorcist 2 is all the fuckery behind the scenes. Which, hey, if you're a movie fan, you probably know that when there's too many cooks in the kitchen, the product can come out like slop. Sometimes all you need is one cook in the kitchen and a whole staff around him to base off of his work. And this movie did not do that, whatsoever. In fact, it kind of did the opposite. There was a lot of disagreements everywhere within the production. Not only with the suits that I mentioned, which if you don't know what I refer to when I say suits, I'm talking about the rich people that don't care about us. But also, to add more salt into the wound, John Boorman took a script that was originally very bleak, that dived into spiritualism, and changed it to something more lighthearted. As well as other hands altering the script after John Boorman got his grubby little hands on it. Which, again, is never a good thing. You don't want too many cooks in the kitchen. Look, I think this one clip perfectly explains The Exorcist 2.
10 minutes into the picture, a guy stood up in the audience. He stood up and he looked around. And he said, "The people who made this piece of shit are in this room!"
What sucks is I really would have loved to see the script, well, at least the original script, put to screen. Because the first Exorcist, it was a bleak movie. No one really won other than Reagan. And I don't even know if you call that a win, because that's like someone stabbing you, and then someone else taking that knife out and then stabbing themselves so you don't get hurt. It's like, cool, I don't have a knife in me anymore, but now I'm back to like how I was before a demon stabbed me. And now there's a Catholic father who's dead. So no one really won. It was a very bleak movie. So to completely change it up to be much more lighthearted and have like just a weird happy tone to it, it just felt so weird and just not like an Exorcist movie. But if you actually want a really good follow-up to The Exorcist, The Exorcist 3 is where it's at. The Exorcist 3 is a 1990 horror mystery, an emphasis on mystery, and it follows Police Lieutenant Kinderman as he investigates a series of murders, which are all very reminiscent of a dead serial killer. which that leads us into the supernatural elements of the movie. The movie was written and directed by William Peter Blatty, and look at that! One chef in the kitchen. And the movie is just a giant cop plot mixed in with some supernatural elements. So with that brief synopsis out of the way, we're about to jump into the movie. So grab a snack and, if you're enjoying it, leave a like. Alright. The third installment of The Exorcist starts instantly letting us know that this movie will be more focused on the religious aspects. And we can tell it's going to be much more than the second movie. Oh, that's such a good title card. Also, Exorcist theme. Mwah. The movie then jumps to a pastor reading some script, all while a bunch of cops gather at the scene of a murder, starting us up for the cop plot plus the religious aspects in the movie. It also instantly connects to the first movie, in a low-key and subtle way. The pastor is giving words about Father Karras, the young priest in the first Exorcist who took the demon and then jumped out the stairs. That pastor lets us know that he'll be meeting up with Detective Kinderman, who is going to be our main protagonist in the movie. And as such, it cuts to him, trying to figure out the recent murders, one of which we already saw. This scene reveals that Detective Kinderman believes that the deceased Gemini killer has something to do with the new murder sprees. Which, hey, it is not good when a serial killer who's been dead for 15 years starts murdering again. Or could it be something else? You see that question? Because it's going to be something else. Because the movie's about demons. So it's a demon. But anywho, Detective Kinderman and Father Dyer begins to converse about not only what Lieutenant Kinderman is working on, but also just questioning faith. And I think the conversations in the movie work really well. Yes, it kind of copies the first movie, but this time you have a father who has a high amount of faith, and then you have a detective who's seen the worst of the worst, and just struggles with trying to find any sort of faith. This is where I have to let you know that the third Exorcist movie has a lot of dialogue, and some people might think that it drags on or that it kind of gets boring. However, I think the writing in itself is a really good conversation piece that just gets brought up quite a bit. You got a guy who just doesn't really have any faith, forced into believing to a certain level, and he has to ask questions about faith and religion to solve his case. But yeah, if you watch this movie, just know that there is a lot of talking in it. But speaking of talking, the conversation between Father Dyer and Lieutenant Kinderman informs us that Kinderman lets Father Dyer know about one of the victims who died, informing Dyer about the theory that Kinderman has that the dead serial killer somehow is killing again. Then the true first horror scene shows up in the movie. Someone who's giving a confession is going a bit overboard with their
cut her throat and watched her bleed. She bled a great deal.
Yeah, so he no live no more. And Lieutenant Kinderman is called to the scene, and there he notices more traces of the Gemini killer. This is where we see how sadistic the Gemini killer truly is.
The kid couldn't move or scream while the killer was nailing and cutting him up. He was conscious. Yes. He was fully aware.
As Lieutenant Kinderman goes to talk to his buddy Father Dyer, introducing us to a new set scene that will be important, especially because one of the best horror movie jump scares of all time happens in this setting. Yet for now we see that Father Dyer isn't feeling too well, but we don't know what the reason is. However, everyone's spirits are up and everyone's in a good mood. Happy, happy, happy. The plot thickens as the audience comes to the same realization as Lieutenant Kinderman, that the two murders that we've already seen might not actually be connected, which would make Lieutenant Kinderman's whole theory kind of cuckoo, seeing how he's talking about there's a dead man killing again. And what follows that realization is a trippy ass dream. As Kinderman slumbers from a long day, he has a fever dream where it's weirdly angelic but also uncanny as hell. He finds the boy who was unfortunately murdered at the beginning of the movie.
Doing, Lieutenant?
I'm so sorry you were murdered, Thomas. I miss you.
I miss you too.
Also, at the beginning of the movie, we get shown the little boy handing a rose to a first-person point of view camera. It's only now that we realize, oh, he was the one who got murdered and crucified, apparently. Not good, man. This movie does unnerving scenes so well. And I think the dream is the pinnacle of that. And unfortunately for Kinderman, he doesn't get a nice wake up because a phone call came through about an incident with Father Dyer, who was at the hospital. Dyer died. The movie is very low-key with its gore, but that's not to say it's lacking brutality. The cops usually describe the victim, like a lot of cop shows usually do. And that works really well here. Not only with the plot seemingly only being a cop mystery drama so far, but it gives off a much more serious vibe. And I feel like if they showed the kills for every single kill that happened in the movie, it would take away from the seriousness. Regardless of all my yapping, now it's personal for Kinderman. But he's gonna have a rough time trying to get information, because the only witness who saw what happened to Father Dyer is an old lady riddled with dementia. Now, any horror movie that falls under the ghost subgenre that involves a little child or a very old person, you can almost 80% of the time guarantee that one of them is getting possessed, or they're gonna be staring at shit, be like, "Do you see that?"
They're here.
And then the parents will be like, "Who's your friend, buddy?" And then they'll be like, "Oh, he's the man without a face." Cool, bud. Time to put you down.
Alfalfa for the rabbits.
The rabbits.
And I get the tender rabbit.
That's my solution to these horror movies. Just shoot the possessed person and call it a day. What are you guys' thoughts on human euthanasia?
Wait.
Kinderman continues his investigation. This time he ventures into the mental ward area of the hospital. Yet he gets interrupted by red tape. Red tape that quickly gets abolished because he convinces all of his co-workers who are like, "Hey, what are you doing? You're crazy, man." He somehow convinces them like, "Hey, this dead serial killer, he's back." Granted, this is another example of where the movie's writing shines. As Kinderman explains that the original murders, completed by the original Gemini killer, all the details were released. However, the details were kind of altered to the media and to everyone in the public. So for example, back in the day when the Gemini killer was originally out there doing his thing, the police gave information to the public saying that the Gemini killer would leave a mark on the back of the victim, when the Gemini killer actually left the mark on the left hand. Yet that part was never mentioned to anyone in the public, so only the Gemini killer would know about that. Which weeds out all the crazy people who are like, "Yeah, I'm a serial killer. Woo!" And the reason why Kinderman is so adamant that the Gemini killer is truly back somehow is because the marks are on the left hand. And the final piece of evidence that he needed was that the Gemini killer always spelled his last words that ended in L with 2 L's. Earlier, when Father Dyer was, excommunicado, there was writing on the wall that had 2 L's on it, which pretty much just gave Kinderman a whole-on heart attack.
Shut your mouth!
But luckily our boy didn't have a heart attack, so that's good, because heart attacks are really bad, because your heart stops. This convinces his co-workers, and he is free to continue his investigation. Now, to make sure you don't think that the Gemini killer possibly did a Tupac and escaped death, the cops watched him get burnt to a crisp in the electric chair. As Kinderman continues his investigation, he has to start questioning things within religion to find answers. And something that leads closer to that answer is the mention of the first Exorcist that happened all those years ago, approximately 15 years ago. And the second that Reagan is involved from the first movie, shit hits the fan and spreads like gonorrhea at a nursing home. And that reference is because a lot of old people just be banging because, the time's up, so why not? Don't add this in the video. Actually, you know what? Add this. Old people be fucking a lot. Your grandma and grandpa are probably having sex right now. Weird things happening in the movie.
Operation Paperclip, the secret recruitment. After World War II, America launched Operation...
I cannot describe the love I have for this movie leading up to this point. All throughout the movie, it's felt like a giant episode of NCIS. Sprinkled in are horror and supernatural elements. And granted, ghostly activities are going to go on because of the title. I think this movie could have been a standalone movie, without ties of The Exorcist. And if it was a standalone movie, it could have revealed this as a twist that, hey, there is something supernatural going on. That being said, this movie still does it perfectly. And from here on out, the supernatural elements truly shine. And I gotta say, some of the scenes and imagery in this movie are some of my favorites in all of horror. The statue of Jesus looking absolutely terrified, bleeding crucifixes, angels that look like they're about to stab someone. It's just all so good. Kinderman gets informed that the man he was looking for inside the psych ward that he just visited earlier for fun is actually saying that he's the Gemini killer.
He says he's the Gemini killer.
The woman was too stunned to speak.
And this is where a little bit of exposition dump happens. We get told that the man inside the cell was washed up in a canal, mumbling to himself. And that's where they picked him up 15 years ago. All of this information culminates in Kinderman believing that one of his old friends is actually the man inside that psych ward, claiming to be the Gemini killer. That man being...
It's a wonderful laugh.
That's right, Father Karras, the father in the original Exorcist movie, who threw himself to his death to try to get rid of the demon. He somehow survived that fall. and managed himself up in a psych ward. With this conversation with Father Karras, it is obvious that he's off his rocker.
Friend over there. On the other side, one needs friends. There is suffering over there. They can be cruel.
Yet he gives Kinderman details that only the Gemini murderer would know. But Kinderman truly doesn't want his friend to be the murderer. He just doesn't believe it, and that's when the demon gets a bit annoyed.
Him.
That's right, demons. Now, this next part might be a bit confusing, but it's okay. I'll grab your hand and we'll walk through it together. Father Karras, now named Patient X in the movie, has some weird tomfoolery that goes on in response for Kinderman saying this.
Gemini is dead.
No, I am not! I'm alive! I go on! I breathe! Look at me!
The switch from actor Jason Miller, who portrays Father Karras, to Brad Dourif, Little Chuckster himself, who is indeed the Gemini killer, is so good and also a bit confusing at first. So look, Brad Dourif's character is the Gemini killer. This face is the guy who got killed 15 years ago in the electric chair. He is the one who did the original spree. However, Patient X, the one that Kinderman is currently talking to in the same room with, that is Father Karras. Or at least that's Father Karras' body. Father Karras is possessed by the Gemini killer. And them switching faces from Jason Miller to Chucky is to illustrate that. And I'm pretty sure no one else sees that it's Brad Dourif's face besides Kinderman. And later on there's a priest, but we'll get to that in a second. But yeah, Brad Dourif, the Gemini killer, is possessing the body of Father Karras. The scenes where it's Kinderman talking to Father Karras and also the Gemini killer are the best acted scenes in the whole movie. Brad Dourif truly shines. He portrays a killer so well, and I've gone off on a tangent about how he's such a good actor when he portrays Chucky, but in this movie he portrays a guy who's fully aware of his evilness, but he's also blinded in the sense that there is beauty in his killings.
Off comes the head without spilling one single drop of blood. Now I call that showmanship.
Compared to like Chucky that he played, where it's just like, I'm having fun, and yeah, I'm a 3-foot doll. Meanwhile, the Gemini killer over here gets chubbed up just thinking about violence. I mentioned this before, but if the Oscars stopped being pretentious pieces of shit and realized that horror is an actual art form, Brad Dourif is one of the actors that would have won multiple Oscars by now. But hey, what do I know? I actually watch movies. The conversation with the Gemini killer leads nowhere other than anger for Kinderman. Most importantly though, the Gemini killer tells Kinderman that he wants the media and the press to know that Father Karras was the one killing everyone. All this possession doohickey gets Kinderman to start looking into scriptures. While he's doing that, at the hospital, this pretty boring and mundane scene happens. Nurse Keaton here unfortunately met an untimely death. This is another kill where I think it would have been goofier if they went more balls to the walls with the kill. Like, even this shot is a bit too much. No, instead they do a description like before. It's just so nasty just hearing it.
Slit down the middle, cut open, and all her vital organs were removed. Then the killer stuffed her body with rosaries. Catholic rosaries, and sewed her back up.
I'm certain it would have been scary to see, but that would have switched up the tone of it being a drama into being more of a gore fest. I don't think it needed that. Also, the whole demon being back makes one of the doctors, Kurt Cobain himself.
You don't like it?
It's nicer when it's straight because it doesn't make your face look so round.
Oh my god!
But with an overdose. I'm telling you now, even though we don't get the information later, he did this to himself. Like, I'm sure the demon was like, oh, bad things, you should do that, ooh. But there wasn't any ghost-like nurse with shears that forced him to do that. But these two deaths lead Kinderman to go back to Father Karras, aka Patient X, to try to have a nice conversation.
Watch as while I rip and cut and mutilate the innocent.
This conversation explains to us how Father Karras is still alive and how the Gemini killer is somehow within Father Karras. So, the reason the Gemini killer is possessing Father Karras is to torment Father Karras. Specifically for what he did to Pazuzu. When Father Karras took the devil inside him in the first Exorcist, and then hurt himself to his death, As he hit the ground and was dying, that was when the switch happened. So Father Karras did actually die in the first movie. So there's really no retconning at all.
Somehow Palpatine returned.
But during that brief time of death and slipping into whatever's next, there was enough out of Father Karras' soul to put in the Gemini killer, but also trapping Father Karras before he can pass on. Father Karras is stuck in that body with no control, all while he's watching the Gemini killer kill. And I want to put another spotlight on the acting, specifically the tears from Brad Dourif. I believe those tears are from Father Karras, as Father Karras has shown that he is strong enough to fight the demons to a certain level. Obviously, the devil is stronger than human, but if there's enough faith and willpower in a human, they can fight it for a certain amount of time.
No! Daddy, chill.
I think this is remnants of Father Karras showing through the Gemini killer. Or it could just be the Gemini killer being insane. Either way, I love it. The Gemini killer at this point is demanding that Lieutenant Kinderman tell the press that he, Father Karras, is the Gemini killer, or at least committing the new spree of killings. However, Kinderman, doing his absolute best not to torment Father Karras even further, goes to try to find the dimension-ridden lady. However, for some reason, he's looking all around and he can't find... Yeah, so Kinderman didn't see Zanny Granny over there. But he does find a dead nurse who doesn't have a bra on. And just a question, movie, why? Like, she could have... whatever. Now, to Kinderman, this is a sign that the Gemini killer somehow managed to possess someone else, because he knows that Father Karras is stuck in the psych ward. This makes Kinderman realize how powerful the Gemini killer is. At least the power is given to the Gemini killer by Pazuzu. And the movie does such a good job at letting us, the audience, know when Kinderman figures something out. So right now, we all realize that, the Gemini killer isn't just possessing Father Karras, he's possessing anyone. At first, Kinderman suspects it's the nurse, who's been assisting him the whole movie.
Hit the light.
Mommy! God almighty! What the hell do you think you're doing? Are you crazy? What on earth is the matter with you?
Unfortunately, Kinderman got swindled by the Gemini killer. In fact, she wasn't even a nurse. You remember that dimension-ridden lady? Yeah, so the Gemini killer kind of mentioned how old people with not the best brain waves and, power function and all that stuff, they're pretty easy to possess. The old lady dressed as a nurse, who is the Gemini killer, so we'll call her Lady Gemini. She's headed to the home of Kinderman to go meet with his family. A nice daughter and a loving wife, and a pretty anti-Semitic mother. Heads up, if you watch this movie in full, it has some dodgy lines in it.
Instead of potatoes, they serve Mama grits. So, she says right out loud, these Jews are crazy.
They are. They're all wackos.
So, just be prepared for that. As this nurse is headed towards Kinderman's home, Kinderman is in a fluster trying to get back to his home to save his family. All while his family gets a call from Kinderman saying that a nurse is coming with a package.
Uh-huh. Okay, sweetheart. That was Bill. There's a nurse coming over with a package.
So either Pazuzu or the Gemini killer is going ham and trying to finish his plot. But either way, Kinderman rushes home.
Oh, hi, Dad. Mother, Daddy's home.
And it seems to be a false alarm. Someone get Granny!
Catatonics are so easy to possess. I've been waiting for you, Lieutenant.
What the fuck is happening?
What's this?
Alright, so Lady Gemini over here either falls weak because she's an old woman, so there's only so much the body can do, or it's because the demon Pazuzu takes away the Gemini's powers, because all while this is happening at Kinderman's home, a priest in the psych ward is trying to perform an exorcism on Father Karras. So Pazuzu was like, alright bro, I gotta dip out for a second because this guy's messing with my flow. And ladies and gentlemen, Pazuzu is finally here.
This time you're going to lose.
And I know I said shit hits the fan earlier. If that was poop hitting a fan, this is like a poop tsunami. It's about to get weird. Okay? In this exorcism, we see that all types of weird curries going on. You got little snakes watching over, which I think is kind of cute.
Kumbaya, my lord. Kumbaya.
And we also...
Come on, you.
This is really the only gore in the movie. Sure, there was blood puddles before, but, like, we're horror fans. We've seen worse.
Oh, can you see?
But I love melting gore, and whenever skin is ripping, that's just so cringe-inducing that I find it terrifying. Yeah, it's not looking so hot for the priest. But luckily, Kinderman got his family safe, and he's had it up to here with this devil. He goes to the psych ward to go talk about his feelings with Father Karras, and that's when he truly realizes the gravity of his situation. And his gun is not going to do much.
Boy, if you don't...
This is the culmination of not only the cop story, but also Kinderman's personal journey. Because the whole movie, he was just pushed towards having to believe and having faith. But now he's just face front with the devil. And with this face-off with a cop versus a demon, the cop doesn't have that much faith in not only God, but just in good. Because he's seen what humanity has done.
I believe in death. I believe in disease. I believe in injustice and inhumanity. And torture, and anger, and hate. I believe in murder. I believe in pain. I believe in cruelty and infidelity. I believe in slime.
However, he does believe in good. So that's different from the first Exorcist when Pazuzu was just against two priests. Granted, one of them was questioning his faith, but nowhere near to the levels of Lieutenant Kinderman. I find the relation between Kinderman and the devil pretty entertaining. And it seems that Pazuzu is actually going to win. However, the priest who got his whole back scalped off has enough power mustered in him to hold up the cross and try to convince Father Karras to fight the demon.
Damien! Fight!
Bill, now! Shoot now! Kill me now!
And thus is the final end of Father Karras. I love this movie so much. The explorations of themes of trying to garner up faith, but seemingly can't because of your surroundings, while also having an entertaining cop story, sprinkled in with paranormal activities and some good-ass jump scares, and beautiful, horrific, and simple imagery. All climaxing into an action-packed last like 10 to 20 minutes. It's just so entertaining and definitely worth the 1 hour and 40 minute watch. And you didn't hear it from me, but if you look up The Exorcist 3 on YouTube, you'll find it. Good quality too. While I enjoy The Exorcist 3, I'm pretty aware of the flaws that the movie had. I'd say some of the biggest are just some of the scenes just drag on a bit too long. You know, we can cut to the next scene now. And some of the scenes just kind of feel random. And when it comes to the story, Father Karras, like, his storyline was kind of the same as the first movie. Specifically, Father Karras' end. It was pretty much the same as the first movie, just getting shot.
Bill, now! Shoot now! Kill me now! Who shot you?
But I don't think that's the biggest gripe, because that wasn't the focal point of the story. But as someone who grew up on watching NCIS, Criminal Minds, what's some other ones that are like that? Here, throw them up on screen. I bet there's a ton. I really love horror movies that have a crime mystery element to it. And even more so, I love horror movies that have that and then just go balls to the wall with something crazy. In my opinion, The Exorcist 3 should have been the sequel to The Exorcist. It's a standalone movie within itself that ties in enough with The Exorcist that it could have just passed as the sequel. And I think if it did so, the response would have been much better than the actual sequel of The Exorcist. Mainly because of the two separate tones of the movies. The first Exorcist was a very bleak movie. The third Exorcist movie was much more of a dramatic mystery movie. Meanwhile, the second one just wanted to go off path into science fiction. And I said this earlier, but I'm saying it again. If you put the third movie as the sequel, and then put Exorcist the Heretic as just a spin-off movie, and advertise it as a spin-off, not 100% relating to the first one, then I think the movie would have done a lot better. Obviously, you would have had to advertise that it's a bit goofier, and not like the other two movies in tone. But I think The Exorcist 2 got unfairly a bad rep. Is it a good movie? No. Is it a bad movie? No. I've seen so many horrible horror movies. And The Exorcist 2 gets put on the list of like the top 10 worst horror movies of all time. And I'm like, you haven't seen that many horror movies, because I can give you 10 right now off the top of my head.
I read about did you say want to a 10-year-old with Down syndrome?
I think I made my point about how the sequel should have worked. Now let's talk about the reception of The Exorcist 3. With a budget of $11 million, it garnered back $44 million. And to put that in perspective, The Exorcist 2, with a budget of $14 million, only garnered back $30 million. And The Exorcist 2 came out when the first Exorcist was still fresh in everyone's mind. And I think that's the biggest effect that the second Exorcist had on the Exorcist series in general. The first Exorcist was released in 1973. The second Exorcist came out 4 years later in 1977. And because of the response of The Exorcist 2, it took years until the next one would come out. The Exorcist 3 came out in 1990. But judging by the box office, plus critics and audiences' reactions, The Exorcist 3 was met with mostly positive reception. Albeit, most people won't call this movie a masterpiece, and that's fair. Yet it certainly is a good movie, and it should have been The Exorcist sequel. If you agreed or disagreed with any of my opinions, then let me know. And if you enjoyed any parts, then leaving a like really does help me out. But if you're still here and you're new, think about subscribing. If you're still here and you're returning, what's up? I don't have anything else to say, so I'll see you next week unless I get slit down the middle by a nurse with some big-ass scissors. See ya.
Who's Candace?
Can this dick fit in you?